All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Brandon von Kenworth, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 13th Annual Duke University Energy Conference. Thank you. The committee, these people you see there, you owe them a big thank you, so give them a wave if you see them over the course of the day. I owe them a big thank you as well. But we've been working for nearly 9 months in order to plan this occasion. And we're so excited to welcome at least some of you back in person to witness today's events. Before we get started, just one housekeeping note for COVID-19. We want to stay vigilant against the spread of disease here. So just make sure you're all wearing your masks here in Janine, and that whenever you're consuming food and drink, you will have opportunities for breakfast, lunch, and we're going to have a reception in the evening as well, that you do so outside. So as we get started, I also want to give a thank you to our sponsors, NextEra, Chevron, AES, Wardzilla, Cadmus, Census, Apex Clean Energy, Influence, for their generosity in sponsoring this event and making today possible. We really couldn't have had them have this event without them. And we're so excited for you all to interact with them over the course of the day and to hear about the great work they're doing in this space. Our theme for today is achieving climate commitments. As students, we're at a unique moment in our lives where we're building the foundational knowledge needed in order to guide our future careers, whether those careers are in engineering, law, policy, or business. So our goal today is perhaps a bit counterintuitive. We hope that you leave with more questions than answers. Decarbonization of the energy system is not a simple topic, and it's one that involves many trade-offs. But by listening to and engaging with the speakers over the course of the day, we hope that these events will spur you to ask more questions and ultimately build the foundational knowledge necessary to guide your future careers. So why the focus on energy? For one, energy is by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for climate change. So, transportation sector, fossil fuel use, burning of gasoline in your cars, accounts for 29% of total greenhouse gas emissions, according to the EPA. Industrial processes like the production of cement, steel, and plastics account for another 23%, and electricity production accounts for another 25%. This last sector is particularly important because as other sectors like transportation and industry transition away from fossil fuels, oftentimes they're transitioning to electricity. And so unless a concerted effort is made in this space, we'll see the share of emissions rise over time. This challenge is particularly important because climate change is no longer a threat that we'll deal with in the distant future. In fact, it's something that we're each dealing with in day-to-day lives today. This past summer, climate change actually impacted my own life just a little bit by changing my engagement plans. I had planned to propose to my fiance on a hike at Cathedral Rock this past summer in Sedona. And if you know me, for the things that I care most about, I'm a huge planner. So the hike was going to be in June, but I booked the photographer back in February. I knew exactly when to wake up, when to eat lunch, when to arrive at the hike, so that way we get to the summit at the perfect time to get the best sunset photo. I even had the photographer draw me a map so that I knew exactly where to stand to get the best shot. So it's to my nightmare that the day before we arrived in Sedona, they closed the entire Coconino National Forest due to the extreme risk of forest fires. So things worked out. She ended up saying yes. So you could say, thank you. But you could say that our relationship did not go up in smoke. At the same time, it must be acknowledged that others were not so lucky. The fires in Sedona were part of a wave of fires that swept through the West this past summer, part of a broader trend made increasingly likely by the threat of climate change. And these threats weren't just limited to fires. A Washington Post analysis found that nearly 1 in 3 Americans experienced a weather disaster this summer, whether that was due to the hurricanes, fires, floods, or another natural disaster. Another 40% of Americans live in coastal counties that could be impacted by the threat of sea level rise. And as we learned at the Energy Justice panel this past Monday, oftentimes those who are most impacted by climate change often have the least means in order to cope with these effects. And so, with these large societal challenges threatened or compounded by the threat of climate change, the world gathered in 2015 and signed the historic Paris Agreement. So what is the Paris Agreement? Well, there are three numbers you need to know: 97%, 1.5 degrees, and 0. First, 97%. 191 countries signed the Paris Agreement, accounting for 97% of the global emissions. This was a monumental achievement, the first time that nearly every country on Earth agreed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And no, just because the US has entered this agreement twice does not mean we're double counting them here. Second, 1.5 degrees Celsius. The goal of the Paris Agreement was to limit the global temperature rise to well under 2 degrees Celsius and pursue efforts to reduce the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This 1.5 degree target was the level widely considered by scientists to be necessary to abate the worst impacts of climate change. And finally, 0. Exactly 0 of the nations are subject to legal consequences if they fail to meet their goals, because these agreements are strictly voluntary. And in fact, a recent analysis by the UN showed that we are currently on track due to on the Paris Agreement to reach 2.7 degrees Celsius, nearly double the Paris target. And so, with this in mind, the world turned to Glasgow. Widely considered to be the successor to the Paris Conference, the goal of the forum was to lock in emissions cutting plans to keep the world on a 1.5 degree target. But so far, results have been a mixed bag. We've seen some major accomplishments. For instance, India committing to reach net zero by 2070. We've seen 130 nations commit to ending deforestation by 2030, including, most notably, Brazil. At the same time, though, we've seen other major landmarks run into key roadblocks. For instance, a plan to phase out coal found themselves with fewer signatories than they originally anticipated. Another plan for wealthy countries to deliver $100 billion in annual climate financing. This was agreed to in Paris and is delayed another few years as well. And just this morning, we saw a draft agreement of what we hope to get out of Glasgow, and we see more vagaries and uncertainties about whether we go forward in the future. So this is the context in which our discussions today lie. Today, we'll hear from 13 industry experts across a variety of industries who have committed their careers to achieving climate commitments. We'll hear from leaders who are pivoting large businesses, like utilities like AES and Washington Gas, to reach net zero. We'll also hear from oil and gas majors like Chevron and automakers like Ford and Rivian, who are changing the way they are doing their business in order to reach these climate commitments. We'll hear from investors like Jeff Ubben, who are finding new opportunities in their investments driven by new opportunities in carbon abatement. And we'll hear from the technical experts and investors who are driving these new technologies. People like Amy Defer, Sophie Purda, Neka Chibule, and Jennifer Gerby, for driving new investments into technologies that will be critical to reaching net zero by 2050. And so whatever your background, whether that's engineering, policy, law, or business, we hope that these conversations spark your interest, spur you to ask more questions, and ultimately build that foundation necessary to dedicating your career to achieving climate commitments.